All right, welcome back into the Sons of UCF. My guest this week might be one of the busiest people I've ever met. I was looking at his bio, so give me 5 minutes. Let me read his bio to everybody. He is the host of the Pete Sousa Show, brought to you by Rogue Media. You can find that weekdays live, 2 Eastern, 1 Central on YouTube. He's also the host of Inside the 12, which is a Big 12 focus show. You can find that Thursdays, 7 p.m., HBO Max, True TV, and YouTube. And in between all of that, he also calls football games and basketball games for ESPN, which will bring him to Orlando this Saturday as the Knights take on North Carolina A&T. His name is Pete Sousa. Again, he's the busiest man in show business, and he's kind enough to carve out some time for us here today. Pete, man, I appreciate you taking some time to join us.
Let's go. Hey, after that intro, I'm ready to take a nap. That guy sounds busy. No, I always say people are like, wow, you're so busy. I'm like, look, if what you did, and you know this a little bit, Adam, with what you do, like if people went to the coal mine in West Virginia and they filmed the guy working down there all day, like his job was to be on camera, people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe how busy that guy is. It just so happens that what I do, people tend to capture it. So yeah, I'm no busier than anybody else, but I'm super pumped to be chatting with you ahead of this game Saturday, UCF and North Carolina A&T at the Bounce House.
At the Bounce House. Well, we'll get into some of the Big 12 stuff in a few minutes, but let's start with UCF. And I want to kind of zoom out for a second, right? Obviously, you've been following the conference for a long time. What did you make of the rehire of Scott Frost back to UCF? And I know it's only one game in, but he's been now in Orlando 9 months. What do you make so far of what you've seen from afar of what Scott Frost has brought and done for UCF?
Initially, there was like a bit of skepticism. I think just because as I get older, that's just kind of how I think I'm wired. But then I took a beat and I thought it's a great hire. I mean, anytime you do the recycling, it sometimes can seem a little desperate, right? But sure. This is not that. This is a Scott Frost who we saw glimpses of exactly who this guy is and what he can do in his first stint at UCF. And I think we saw the exact opposite at Nebraska. And I think like that is just one of those, like he gets a mulligan. And I think his hire back to UCF really was brilliant because there's two things there that I think really lend itself to this being the right hire. One, he truly is committed to UCF, right? Like now more than ever. I believe that Scott Frost, wherever his feet were, he was going to be committed and be in that moment. But the Nebraska thing was what it was, man. That's a huge situation for him. And to say yes to that made perfect sense. Now, he talks about his wife and how excited they were to get back to Orlando. He also talks about the fact, and this, this being around the history of UCF better than I do, that 2017 squad that went undefeated, like that team really propelled, I think, UCF into a Power Four conference. Like that whole deal. I mean, there was a lot of stuff around that, right? But if you could point at one thing, at least me, that's responsible for UCF being in the Big 12, that might be it. And I just think it's a perfect marriage, and I think he's the right guy for this job. And UCF they're not like a sleeping giant. They're just like, because I really believe like it will be tapped back into soon. It's gonna take a minute,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that 2017 team puts UCF on the map, right? 2018, they go undefeated again up until the Fiesta Bowl, right? So that 2-year stretch, I think, really helped propel UCF in those conversations, talk to Big 12 and perhaps other conferences. But obviously now we sit here today in the Big 12. I don't think it's a hot take to say UCF's not here without that 2017 team. I don't think that's a hot take at all. But what might be a hot take, Pete, is this current Knights team. 63 new players. This is the new era of college football. Obviously, you cover teams in and out the Big 12. Outside of West Virginia, I think UCF's going through the most number of turnover. How much of a challenge do you think that's going to be for this Knights team to kind of gel together quickly? They have a tough Big 12 schedule coming up really quickly here. How hard do you think it's going to be for Scott Frost and that staff to get 63 plus new guys on the same page and rocking and rolling in the same direction?
Look, man, I think it's interesting because, of course, September 20th, they're going to take on North Carolina. And we saw the other night with Bill Belichick and all the additions there and just sort of the struggles that are had. I think I think it is something that we're going to see more and more of being a problem, like this crazy turnover, just attributing or contributing to some issues, whether it is misalignment or whether it's guys, that don't even that are going to be in the meeting room today, in Orlando at UCF when the whole team meets together, like people don't even know each other, and that's not Scott Frost's fault, and that really isn't even their fault. That's just like time takes time, and we're in a culture now with college football where like this is the norm, and I think it makes coaches' jobs a lot harder. And to answer your question, I think it really does make it difficult to just kind of like, you can't put that in a microwave. Team chemistry, all the little things that help the ball bounce your way. And I think now, doing the Houston game last week, Willie Fritz talks about, how important retention is to them. And they're recruiting their own players, more so than people outside of the building. And I think that is something that you'll see from Scott Frost. And you're going to have additions every year, but I don't think you'll have this massive turnover that you have with the new coaching staff. But like, again, to answer your question, I think it's really difficult. And I think we're seeing that around the country as evidence. Like, we can point to Colorado and Deion because they had 70 transfers, I think, that year. And that was, 3 years ago. And they had Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter, and they still only won 3 or 4 games, like that first year that they were all there together with Deion. So, it's not an easy road to hoe.
I'm curious. Obviously, you're calling the game this Saturday. I'm sure in preparation you watched UCF's first contest against Jacksonville State. Yeah. So knowing Scott Frost and kind of knowing what he's kind of been offensively and kind of a guru title, all that good stuff, what did you think you were going to see before you turned the tape on? And what did you actually think after you watched the tape of that first game against Jacksonville State?
Well, we all remember like, UCF fast and the tempo. And that's not what we saw last Thursday night. And I don't know that the weather had much to do with that. I just think, that first play of the game when Cam Francher just overthrows a wide receiver, I forget who it was right now, but I saw the same thing at Houston with Connor Wegman. His first pass had a wide open guy down the sidelines, the guy who transferred from Alabama to Houston, and he overthrew him. It's just like excitement, it's jitters, whatever it is, those home run balls ending up as completions totally changed the complexion of both of those games. And I thought that like that was the beginning of, okay, we're going to have to run the football here. And even one of the biggest passing plays of the evening was Miles Montgomery, right? Like 64 yards on a short pass, not a run and not a long pass. So I think that it was taking what the defense gave them, whether it was Cam Francher or Taven Jackson. But I do think that is not who Scott Frost is. I think he would like to take more shots down the field. I think he said as much after the game. It's one thing to take what they give you, but I think he'll want to be a little bit more aggressive with Steve Cooper there coming up in this game against A&T. That's what I think, because you got to establish that.
I'm curious what you thought of Taven Jackson. I don't know how much you know of his story, but not named the starter coming out of camp, right? A kid with P4 pedigree out of Indiana and Tennessee. I think a lot of folks assumed that he would be the guy, right, just based on that pedigree. Cam Fancher gets the start, lasts all of 27 plays before he gets absolutely drilled on a blindside blitz. His status still in doubt, according to Scott Frost. But what did you make of what you saw of Taven Jackson coming into that game with a huge weather delay, obviously playing a tough Jacksonville State defense and Charles Kelly? What did you make of what you saw of Taven Jackson?
I mean, I got to say, I loved it. I mean, there was the one fumble, but he threw for almost 300 yards in a half, basically. Sure. And he was efficient. And from what I've heard, same as what you guys have heard from Scott Frost, is like he really took that pretty well. Like when it was announced that he would be number 2. Guys at this age, and especially in this era, and I know this from talking to a ton of other coaches, like they can check out in moments like that. Sure. Like they can be like, whoever their representation is or whatever, they can be like, all right, where am I going next? I mean, it's really not crazy to think that way. For me and you, it is. But like now that's kind of like the new mindset. So for him to dig in and really take his lumps, and then when he was called upon to show, not just to be like, oh yeah, I'm ready, but he showed he was ready. I thought that said a lot. And I am, just as somebody who's like a fan now, I'm a fan, always a fan of football, but I'm like, why aren't you going to start him? Like for sure, but he hasn't made that announcement, and that's why Scott Frost knows so much more about football than I ever will. But we're gonna, whether it's a wait and see because it's strategy. The guys on the other side of the ball. This isn't about North Carolina A&T, but they got 2 quarterbacks too. They had one guy start the game. He threw a couple picks. They put the second guy in, Braxton Wilson, and he did really well. And I think they're going to name him the starting quarterback, but you could probably see 2 quarterbacks from North Carolina A&T on Saturday. And it's happening. I mean, this is specific to these 2 teams, but you do see more so than ever, Adam, like coming down the stretch to the start of a season, the starting quarterback is named like the week before or like 3 days before. That's not how it usually is. You have a really good idea of who your quarterback's going to be coming into camp because you've had probably or hopefully a lot of time with them, whether it's been spring ball or having them on campus as an underclassman. It's just much different now. So we're literally learning about these guys like on the field playing before our eyes, whether we've seen them play in other places before. Now we're seeing them where they're supposed to be fitting in and producing right now, and it takes a minute.
Obviously, Pete, you spent a lot of time around the Big 12. UCF's defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch, obviously spent some time in the Big 12 at Oklahoma, had some success, then all of a sudden things kind of, got off the rails for him, leaves, goes to USC, and is now at UCF. That defense played well against Jack State, but I'm curious your thoughts on the Alex Grinch hire for UCF. Again, you've seen him, you've been around him, you've heard him a lot in his time in Oklahoma. What do you make of that hire, and how do you think he fits at UCF?
I think he's a great fit. I think it's a great hire. Anybody from the Gary Pinkel tree, to me, is pretty impressive. And not only is he related to Coach Pinkel, but he also, has learned from him, and he has that mindset. And I just think he's a really good defensive coach. I've heard him talk before, but watching his press availability earlier this week, he goes on forever and goes so in depth about this team. Like we were talking earlier about do guys, do coaches know all the players know each other? He hasn't been in Orlando for a terribly long time, and he knows that roster inside and out. And I like how he is who he is. If you notice, he hasn't tempered down any of what makes Alex Grinch on the field and off the field as well. And I think that yesterday he was talking to the media and he mentioned, hey, I want to play more guys, but you got to show me that you can play before I play you. Well, you're kind of like, wait, what? You want to play more guys? Well, you're the coach, just play them. But they got to show him in practice that, they're ready to play, which obviously, you're throwing the gauntlet down, you issue a challenge, something you could probably do before North Carolina A&T. But I think it's a great hire. I really do. And I think that Oklahoma situation was rough, not just for him, for a lot of folks. So I don't think that's any kind of long-term stain on his track record for sure.
Well, it's probably not a game that they all want you to judge them by, Pete. I'm curious, anybody else from UCF really stand out to you when you kind of cut the tape on and watch that week 1 contest against Jack State?
Yeah, Miles Montgomery. When you think about the fact that obviously a Cincinnati transfer, but last year obviously in the shadows and for good reason, right behind RJ Harvey. But now he's given his chance, and what I liked about his effort was, one, it seems like he is a warrior and he is the bell cow, and it seems like he got better as the game went on. And you got to love that if you're Scott Frost, right? And also, I believe that Scott Frost would have liked to have gotten other running backs involved, but that became what was working. And you just keep going to what's working. And I think that is why Miles Montgomery stood out to me, because they couldn't get away from him in a sense. With I think 160 yards total offense, he was just a critical part of what UCF was trying to do. And I think Scott Frost, if he could have, drawn it up, the ending, probably would have wanted it to look a different way. But they went to him because they had to go to him, and he answered. He answered the bell, which I thought was pretty cool, because it goes back to our first question, what were your impressions of Scott Frost and the offense? Well, I think once they realized in that second half, hey, this is what we're going to do after the delay, and this is what's going to work. I mean, that touchdown to win the game was set up by the running game, so it all started right there. So Montgomery, I thought, you can tell he's just the leader of this team. And every time Scott Frost gets a chance to tell us that, that's what he does. So you've got to be like I can't wait. We get a chance to talk to these guys. I'll talk to Coach Frost, obviously Coach Grinch and Coach Cooper on Friday. And I can't wait to see an elongated version of what he has to say about Miles Montgomery, because I think it's phenomenal to see a guy that waited his turn really take advantage and embrace the opportunity and succeed.
I'm curious, what's when you sit down with Scott Frost, what's your first question to him going to be? What's the first thing that you want to know, or what's the thing that you're most curious to learn from Scott Frost?
Well, I say, what restaurant were you looking forward to going back to most when you came to Orlando? I really will ask him that. And then I would love to ask, what's remaining from, some of the stuff on the walls, right?
Sure,
because it wasn't that long ago from when he was here before. And I want to find out what, because we know Adam, but we don't know. And it was based on your first question. What is the identity of this team heading into week 2? Who are you guys? And one of the things, you played Jack State, I think you did have the opportunity, because the game was probably closer than they would have liked. You kind of learn more about your team in games like that than you had planned on learning about them. I'm here in Central Texas, right? So Baylor's a big topic of discussion. And I had on my show today, I got a chance to talk to Craig James, right? Former SMU Pony Express. And I was asking him about SMU and Baylor. And he said, it's funny, SMU, they took care of business in week 1, but Baylor probably knows who they are now, right? After that week 1 loss to Auburn, a very good first week SEC opponent. So I'm really interested to see what Scott Frost has to answer when I ask what the identity is, because, they probably did learn a lot about their team because of how close it was and because of in the fashion the game was won. But I would love to know what this identity is.
Yeah, I mean, Frost has talked all offseason about the thing he did not know about his team is how would they respond in adversity. And he got an early dose of that. Now, I would venture to tell you he probably was hoping he would learn that a little later than week 1. But at the end of the day, that actually may be the best thing for this team, Pete, is if you're Scott Frost, you say to your team, hey, this is the worst we're going to look. And so we did not look our best, and we still found a way to come from behind, by the way, because folks won't remember. But UCF was down in that game, scored 2 touchdowns late to come from behind. That's a galvanizing moment Frost could obviously take to kind of get this team up and ready for the next game.
For sure. And I think also you get to take a look and say, a win is a win is a win. You could say that early in the season because again, we really don't know how good this team will be, right? UCF, but you found a way to win in that opener. It was a clumsy game with a delay, and obviously you didn't want it to be that close, but a win is a win is a win. So now let's turn the page and let's continue to find out who we are and continue to work towards our strengths, and that's why I like the identity question, because it not so much is who we are right now, but it's a vision of who we want to be as well.
Pete, I'm curious. Obviously, you cover the Big 12. Again, you're part of the Inside the 12 crew every Thursday, 7 o'clock on HBO Max, YouTube, True TV. What's the state of this UCF team as it relates to the rest of the Big 12? Obviously, in every power ranking I've seen this week, every poll, there's UCF at 16, right? The first 2 years under Gus Malzahn did not go well. Obviously, he's no longer here. And Scott Frost is here. What's the thoughts about UCF, you think, conference wide as they enter their 3rd year in the Big 12?
Well, I can tell you, I think that they're grossly underrated. I thought that all off season. You just can't stick UCF in the basement and say, okay, here's where they are. Kind of almost to say is this is where they belong. I don't believe that. I think based on what we talked about at the top, right, all the turnover, you're going to have problems sort of making a case for yourself to be any kind of preseason favorite. But there are more questions than answers around this UCF team right now, which can be a good thing. I mean, honestly, the reason they stopped doing these Big 12 preseason polls is because last year Arizona State was in the bottom, and it kind of made it funky for them to get into the college football playoff. It maybe was a little bit more of a fist fight than they would have liked because they were cellar dwellers to start the season. So lest anyone think that the people that are in charge of making these polls or voting on this stuff, that they know exactly what they're doing, that's not the truth. A lot of times what we're doing is we're voting based on history and things from the past, and we just don't know. So when you think about UCF, I think you look at Scott Frost. I think you look at his track record the last time he was here. Now a much different landscape, being in a different conference, and the sport has changed somewhat even over the course of a few years. But I think that's really promising to have him back into a place where he knows people know him. He knows how to get things done. And then it comes down to, okay, you guys, you have a huge alumni base, huge. I mean, UCF is a rather new school, but the alumni base is all over the place. And I think that those numbers can help you with money down the stretch, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be, how much money do you have? How much money are you going to put into your program? But I wouldn't sleep on UCF. I'm telling you, even this year, you're telling me you beat A&T. Well, I'm calling the game. You should beat North Carolina A&T. Sure. What do we know about North Carolina right now? Well, we're going to find out. And then Kansas State, they barely beat an FCS team. They're a great example too because I still think Kansas State is a solid team, but that's another one. Early in the season, a win is a win is a win. We got the W. Let's just watch the film. What can we get from it? Flush it and move on. But I think UCF could certainly surprise some people this year, simply because everybody's got them in the basement, like I said.
Probably an inside baseball question, Pete, but I'm just curious. Take me inside your process, right? Yeah. Again, 65 new players in UCF, right? I don't suspect you watch North Carolina A&T every week, right? So what's the preparation look like for you as you're preparing to call this game and try to get to know these rosters, get to know these players? You only have 1 week of tape to study. Yeah. Kind of take me behind the curtain of what's life like for you as you prepare for this game on Saturday.
Well, I'll tell you, because that's a great question, because things have changed so much. Never when you're calling a college game, it's not like, and obviously there's more pressure if you're calling like an NFL game, but because it's a bigger stage, right? But like with college football, like there's always so many new guys. The rosters are always so big that like you really have to become immersed in both rosters and both teams to have that feel that can bring about confidence when you're calling a game in the booth, So I listen a ton. That's how I knew who you were. That's why I told you that I loved your pod. Like, I've listened to you before, dude, because that is a space, right? I like to go on runs or walks. I like to work out, I'm like very ADD, dyslexia, the whole deal. So it's like, for me to sit down, concentrate, and just read something for a while can be difficult. But the podcast medium and all the interviews out there, and even articles turned into audio, that is super helpful for me. I'm always listening to something, usually the week of a game, regarding either team. If I'm not, I kind of freak out like I'm not doing my job. You get a little anxious because you feel like you're wasting time, even though that's probably a little crazy. And then I write down the things I hear, I write them down. That's a big part of my process, and then I have my boards, which you prepare, and I try to. We can put so much on these boards pregame that I have tried to whittle it down to, with help from other people and some advice, just like 1 or 2 big points about each player, and that's it. And quotes from coaches. I've worked harder on keeping my boards a little cleaner so things can stick out rather than putting so much stuff everywhere. But at the end of the day, and I was told this earlier this week by Wayne Larrivee, the Green Bay Packers play-by-play guy on radio. The number one thing that a broadcaster needs is preparation. So like, I just don't stop preparing, because ultimately that leads to a confidence level that will have me, I'm able to come on your show, again, like I don't watch UCF all the time, but I'm pretty dialed in with UCF and who they are right now. And that just, and what fun, what a gift, what great joy I take in getting ready from this stuff. It's what I'd be doing anyways. So it's, yeah.
I know you mentioned you've been to the bounce house before. What's your experience been like last time you were down there?
Well, dude, I'll tell you, I was in the bounce, like it was amazing. And I'm not expecting the same type of deal. When I was there, it was 2019. Dylan Gabriel was on the roster. He was even put in the game a few times in like a wildcat kind of like operation. And it was really exciting. The place was bouncing, shaking, and you know what game it was? It was I think the war on I-4, right?
Okay.
So I think it was USF right around like Thanksgiving time. And it was like, I mean, there were a couple of fights. Like it was, you really felt that rivalry. It was super cool. And yeah, that was cool for me to have as a first experience there, working a football game, because I was like, this place is electric. This football program means business.
Let's zoom out a little bit, Pete, and talk Big 12 through, I guess, a week and a half, if we count week 0 for the two teams. What do you know about the Big 12 after a week and a half? What are you sure about after this first weekend, whatever the week 0 game counts for?
All right. I'm barely sure about anything. So let's get that out there. I'm not the guy that's going to be like, oh, let me tell you something, Adam. I saw Utah, and that's a team that you'll see at AT&T Stadium in early December. I don't want to say that, but I will say, watching Utah, they're scary. Their offensive line is really good. They got two guys, Spencer Fano, and there's another guy on their line, their offensive line, who would probably be first-round picks. And watching them play UCLA, I watched a replay of that a little bit last night because it was on like FS1. And Devin Dampier, their quarterback, looks so sharp. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, like, it would make perfect sense for Utah just to bounce right back up to the top of the conference. Like, I feel pretty good about Utah. And just kind of like that program in itself, like we talk about all the massive roster turnover and all these different places, like Kyle Whittingham, he's kind of got it going there, you know, and sure, just to kind of restart after last year where your quarterback situation was a nightmare. I like Utah a lot. I also love the quarterback play in the conference. I think that makes it so much fun. You know, every week going on inside the 12. I do it with Taylor McCarg, who played quarterback at Rice, and we get a chance today, right? And we talk about TCU, and we talk about Josh Hoover and the amazing day that he had, and just these amazingly accurate passes. Another thing that I'm sure about, that I am so interested to see what the heck happens with Texas Tech this year.
Sure.
I'm dying to see if, you know, that thing, if they can really cash in on that, right? No pun intended. So those are some things that I'm looking at, but there are a gazillion storylines in the Big 12, which makes it one of the best conferences in the country. I think one of the things that we all would like to see is, you know, there's like 6 games they have against Power 4 conferences this weekend. Yeah. And I would love to see the Big 12 win 4 of those, right? Because we talked to Brett Yormark to start the season off on Inside the 12, and he's pretty straight shooter. And we asked him what's going to take to get multiple teams in the college football playoff, teams from the Big 12. And he said, you got to win the big non-conference games, period. And, you know, there were some missed opportunities, I think, last weekend, Baylor for sure. Yeah. And so you kind of want to take advantage of opportunity this weekend, because I think they're favored. The Big 12 is in 4 of those 6 games. That's just off the top of my head.
Yeah, TCU really helped save the conference, at least from a tough weekend on Monday.
Yeah,
night.
And it's weird. We talk about those TV windows and stuff. The whole world was watching. Yes. And they watched TCU just open up a can on North Carolina. And I was listening to Wes Durham on Sirius Radio this morning, and he was like, I'm even hearing like Sonny Dykes like called off the dogs. Like, it could have been worse.
Wow.
Which is great to hear. It's a Big 12 guy.
You mentioned a team earlier, Pete, that UCF will see early in the season, Kansas State. Obviously, they go to Ireland and lose a tough one to Iowa State. And then a bit of a head scratcher. North Dakota was in this game, and obviously that very much could have gone the other way. What do you make of this Kansas State team, who I think a lot of folks thought had the possibility to be one of the teams contending? Again, they still very well might, but what do you make of this team early on after you've seen them 2 straight weeks kind of struggle a little bit?
I mean, dude, I don't know. I'd be lying to you if I told you I could make sense of it all. I was not so surprised. I didn't think that they would play like a house of fire, because I do believe like that 5,000-mile trip coming back from Dublin off a loss is like a real kick in the you-know-what. Yeah. You know, I think that Iowa State, you could, whatever you want to say, they seem to have done a better job managing that whole part of it. Or maybe they're just that good. Time will tell. With Kansas State, I think that you were in a vulnerable spot on Saturday, obviously, as we saw, and they found a way to win. I think you move forward, and you really got to hope that Avery Johnson starts to almost play above the expectation of what we thought. I mean, I do believe his connection with Matt Wells, their new offensive coordinator, could really help them and help him. I know last year that situation was not great, like OC and quarterback, and I think that's going to be a big deal this year. Can they work that out? There was all kinds of stuff, like ancillary stuff around the program last year, that I think is gone this year, like some of the noise and whatnot. So the table you would have thought heading into the season was set for Kansas State to go on a run to start the year. But that was a really close game they played against Iowa State. So, we're going to find out what these guys are made of pretty soon. And I think we'll have to wait till we get into the Big 12 schedule. But yeah, that is a team who I am certainly interested to see, how they pan out. And, what do we get from Avery Johnson? Who is this guy? We all know what he can do. What's he going to do?
Pete, I'm curious, you travel around the country. You're probably been at every Big 12 venue at this point. What's the most raucous Big 12 environment you've been a part of? What's the scene, the setting, the school where you're like, man, it's going to be a thing when I head out to that school this upcoming weekend?
Well, it was college basketball, and it was
sure
my first year doing games for ESPN. I don't know how somebody made a mistake, and they put me on a top 15 game. It was Iowa State and Kansas at Allen Fieldhouse. And I'm like a hardcore basketball guy. I grew up in Philly, grew up around the Big Five and the Palestra. And I've been around most of those like cathedrals. I'd never been to Allen Fieldhouse, and I'd never seen anything like it. Just, you show up it seemed like 2 days before the game in January, they got like thousands of kids like sleeping outside. I was like, what is happening? And it was an experience. It was a real experience. And since I'm talking to you, it is definitely worth bringing up that I did a UCF basketball game, I think 2 years ago. I did it with BJ Taylor, and it was after, I think the weekend after UCF began the season by upsetting Kansas, I think.
Sure.
And dude, you guys had the palms out. I mean, it was, and that is a very underrated college basketball environment. And I kind of think the secret is sort of out on that. People understand how awesome that environment can be. That was one that I was super impressed with.
Yeah, we have to have you back on to talk hoops. BJ's a good friend of our show, so have to have you back on to talk hoops. Hopefully, Johnny Dawkins can make some stuff happen this year. Again, a completely new roster in basketball as well as football. So it should be a fun time. But we can't wait to maybe have you back on when the hoop season comes around and talk a little basketball with you.
Hey, you hit me up. You let me know. I'd love to come back on. Like I said, Adam, you do a great job. So I appreciate the intel you put out there for the rest of us to take in.
Well, we appreciate you, Pete. If you like Pete, again, Monday through Friday, the Pete Sousa Show, Rogue Media Network. You can find him on YouTube, Inside the 12, Thursday, 7 p.m., HBO Max, True TV, YouTube. And this Saturday, if you're not going to be at the game, tune on ESPN Plus, 7 p.m. You will see Pete in hopefully a shaking, raucous bounce house calling a great game for the UCF Knights. Pete, always a pleasure, man. Good to meet you. Good to catch up, and can't wait to catch up with you soon, okay?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Adam. I really appreciate it.